geometry of wealth, I think, is more directly related to your current venture, right?
Mhm.
So maybe just talk about the core themes from that.
Yeah, and the Geometry of Wealth is a prequel, in part because I'm a Star Wars nerd. But I got to the end of the Investor's Paradox, and grappled a bit with, like, okay, maybe these are some decent perspectives on choosing good investments, but who cares? There's a, you know, even just money world. There's a lot more going on, saving and spending, and how to manage your career, and better and worse ways to be charitable. So, and I was also had just sort of grown older, and my kids were older, and my marriage had developed, and my parents are getting older. Just life's, I'd say, just more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the idea for that was to answer that question that I heard in one way or another, not all, rarely explicitly, but from individual investors all over the country who I was giving speeches to. Am I going to be okay? Like, is this going to work out? Like, do I have what I need? Um, why am I not always satisfied when I make more? How come I get to age 65 and I've got plenty in the bank? I still have the urge to ask my advisor, or talk to my partner, or hang out with my friends and say, well, what's next? I'm blessed to be able to have maybe 25, 30 years to go. And we're at the point where retirement is about as long as our working lives.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't really supposed to be that way. Thanks to modern medicine, it is. Well, that's good. But the retirement script is very different. So, I think I tried to come up with an answer for that. Number one, for me, as a middle-aged guy. Number two, as a father of three teenagers now, who I worry about them because the world's big and noisy and dangerous, and I want them to lead amazing lives. And money is just a topic that's unavoidable. I don't think we have great ways of speaking about it. So I did want to form some vocabulary and mental models that can do that. So, I coined this term funded contentment, which is my definition of true wealth, the ability to underwrite a meaningful life, a deliberately loaded sentence, because what do we mean by meaning? What do we mean by underwrite? But, with that as the starting point, as distinct from the accumulation of more, or trying to be, rich, or purchase the things that more money buys, what's kind of a comfortable, organic, iterative way to pursue this funded contentment? And, I set up a really simple model. You define your purpose in life, and then in that context, you set your priorities. You think about risk. You think about what comes first, if you have finite resources. And then within that, plan that you form, how do you make specific decisions, form good habits? And, attached, just sort of simple geometry to it: circle, triangle, square. Because in the book, setting purpose or defining your purpose is circular. Like, we don't want to think about it.
Revisiting it.
What's it? Yeah. Every now and then, it's like, hey, what the
Right.
hell am I doing? And so it comes around. It's annoying to think about it every day. But every now and then, it's like, where am I? And then, on the, moving to priorities, I talked about three, hence the triangle. First, you protect yourself, you manage risk, then you achieve balance, both emotionally and financially, and then you strive or reach for more. So three priorities. And then the book the square is just about how to set good expectations for your investment portfolio. And there's four dimensions to that. I like when other people do that in terms of just creating simple things to remember. I love the line that all models are wrong, but some are useful. I wanted to create a useful model for people to think about true wealth that they can do casually and without any brain damage.
So one of the things that struck me, I really like this equation, and I could have. I don't think this is exactly right, but I think it's directionally correct. Happiness equals reality minus expectations, or something like that.
Uh-huh.
What is it exactly, and what do you mean by that? That resonates a lot, but I'm keen to hear you sort of explain it.
Yeah, I actually. So I think, I'm not the only one who says that, and I forget the citation, but there is a very quantitative paper in a a neuroscience journal that kind of maps out that equation. Sometimes in my talks, I like to put that on the board. It's like, hey, here's the formula for happiness. Can everyone write this down? And it's like, it's this wide. It's nothing but Greek letters. It's, you know, it's funny, not funny. You know, and Kahneman, Daniel Kahneman wrote about this a lot. You know, it is, I think, one of the more interesting observations in social psychology and behavioral finance, which is that we are sense-making creatures. Like, what we do most of the time is make sense of the world. We seek patterns because when the world is noisy and discombobulated, we feel anxious, we feel scared, that fear instinct kicks in. And so we're always kind of looking a little bit forward. Let me put it differently. We're always trying to find patterns, and we're always trying to think about, okay, I'm going to take my next step, literally and figuratively. Is the ground there? Okay, when I go left foot, left foot, and so forth, is the ground going to be there on every step? That's a subconscious thing, but we're taking, if you take that trivial example and expand it, we're always forming expectations as to what comes next in a millisecond, in a minute, in a day, in a year, in a lifetime, and so forth. And what we've seen both in the neuroscience literature, but you and I and others understand it intuitively, is that if the road is there to meet your foot, and so, you know, you take that step and you have met, you know, your expectations have been met, like you're happy, or at least you're not sad. Like, you know, like one of those old cartoons when the Wile E. Coyote like goes and there's no, he's running and the mountain ends or the ledge ends and he's, you know, moving his legs,
Yeah,
falls down.
mm-hmm.
You know, you use that as a metaphor for life. When things are as we hope they are, we're in a pretty good mental spot. We might not be ecstatic, but we're pretty happy. And you can apply that to goals-driven behavior. It could be, you know, we're having friends over tonight, for example, I'm going to be grilling. You know, am I going to make the burgers well, or not? Are people going to be happy with the meal? Trivial, but still, that's going to happen in several hours from now. My son is upstairs doing his college applications. He's got a couple top choices. Is he going to get into one of his top choices? You know, so he's forming expectations. Tracy and I, you know, sometimes we have conversations about, well, where do we want to live once we're empty nesters? Do we stay in Chicago or do we move somewhere else? So it's any scope of trivial to important, from near term to long term. We have the expectations, and when you know, at that moment when things meet or exceed your expectations, you're pretty happy, and when they don't, you're not. And we're always on that rhythm. I mean, on that treadmill. You know, so that's happiness equals reality minus expectations.
So, I mean, it seems to me that the key term here is the expectations term, right? Because happiness is the result. Reality is what is.
Yeah.
The only thing that you really have control over, maybe, or not even control over, but that changes, is your expectations. And so how do people set expectations? And this is a bit of a leading question, because I did want to get into some of the literature that makes the case that humans are relative status seekers.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it's, and it's relative status seeking, both cross-sectionally, so comparing to your neighbor or your peer group or your perceived peer group, and also through time. So am I better or worse than my past self, or where my past self expected to be right now? Right.
Right.
So how do you think about expectations on a relative basis? And, you know, in the context of the fact that often these are the types of expectations about which you have the least amount of control, because it's relative to other agents.
Yeah. So, okay. Where do we start with this? This is good. I think so much of meaning in life is grounded in this process of setting and managing and updating expectations. And what you said a few moments ago is profoundly true, and I'm referring specifically to the idea that we have some but not complete control over those expectations. And to the extent, and then what I'll add on to that is that to the extent that we can be a little bit more thoughtful or intentional or deliberate about what it is we expect from the trivial to the profound, I think we have a more grounded existence. I think we feel, more present. I think we feel like we're not in a Calgon take me away moment where everything is just, sort of it's just noise and chaos. The status stuff's really interesting. And again, to, I think, amplify your point, we don't have a lot of control over that. You're talking about, envy, you're talking about greed. I mean, this is biblical. Like, this goes back to the very beginning. And I think in some ways, as I've been doing this for a few years, like, I think self-awareness is probably as good as it gets. Meaning, like, there's a lot of things that you really can't change, but you can be a little bit more thoughtful about the process, and maybe on the margins you can be intentional. I mean, the analog is maybe what Danny Kahneman said about his knowledge of psychological biases and heuristics, which is like he literally wrote the textbook on it, but that doesn't mean that he has shaken any of his biases.
Right.
J.P. Morgan, the original John Pierpont Morgan, had this great line that nothing corrupts your financial judgment worse than the sight of your neighbor getting rich. And so I think it's important for us, to the extent possible, to be, self-aware of that process. We all feel it. We see others doing better, and it's like, oh, why couldn't I do that? Why don't I have that? And there's the other dimension, which is you relative to you. And, I think, I've been kind of trying to dive into this psychology and neuroscience literature on the future self. I think that's probably a little less emotionally disturbing, to think that you haven't progressed as a person relative to where you were. I think that's probably less bothersome than the envy piece, when you think about what motivates so many people's behavior, whether it be in consumption or just in other walks of life. It's very much driven by what others have and the sense of how you're going to be perceived once you do or don't make those decisions that, result in more possessions or whatever the case may be. I mean, long story short, and just appreciating that your expectations so dominate kind of the not only just the quality of your daily life, but the overall narrative that you define your life by. I think being present and mindful about what that is really pays off. And for me, like, my better moments, my better days, my better weeks are the ones where I'm going slow enough to think about that a little bit and appreciate it, and even allow it to seep into my actions and my plans.
Yeah, I mean, I'm constantly telling my wife that the secret to happiness is lower expectations, but she doesn't seem to be buying my prescription. I don't know why that is. Maybe she thinks I'm being manipulative.
Well, but let me push back a little bit, because we can all I think that's a dangerous route to go, Adam, for the reason that we can set our expectations to zero and sort of say, anything I have, a meal on the table, a roof over my head, I should be thrilled every day. And maybe is a little bit of incremental, gratitude practice that we can all engage in to appreciate that. And that's totally fine. But we also have a instinct, and it's at the genetic level. It's not a preference or a value. I think it's biological, and that is the interest in that is growth. That is wanting more and more. You could put a positive spin on a negative, or a negative spin on more, and I do both in the way that I write and talk about things. But to say, well, just expect less, you pretty quickly suck the joy out of life, because there is something inherently joyful about growth and about change. And so I think there are boundary conditions for how low you can set expectations, beyond which you just make yourself miserable.